let's get practical. How to write a memoir. And you can call right now 1300 222 774, 1300 222 774. If you've been thinking of writing your memoir, but maybe it feels a little bit self-indulgent, like why would anyone care about my story? Or if you started it a while ago, maybe 10 or 20 years ago, and it reads like a really long diary, what are you doing wrong? 1300 222 774 or 0437 774 774. Let's get practical. Louisa Deasey is on the line. She's a writing coach. She's a published author. She's written 2 memoirs, Love and Other U-Turns, and A Letter from Paris, after a career in journalism and communication. She is also an educator. Good morning, Louisa.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you loud and clear. So why is a memoir not a life story or a series of long diary entries?
Yeah, so a lot of people there's so many misconceptions about memoir. A memoir is a story. And I think the reason that a lot of people think, oh, it's just a self-indulgent chronicle of your entire life, which is a comment that I got a lot when I released my first book because I was only 32. And I remember someone at a party saying, oh, how precocious to write a memoir. I was like, wow, that's interesting. It's because it's a story, and it's not just, you're not just handing someone 100 pages of, okay, I was born in this hospital and I did this and I did this. It's actually a story. And memoirs not really taught in academic writing programs the way that other genres are taught, like novel writing or fiction writing, or even how to sort of prescriptive nonfiction. So that's probably why there are these misconceptions about it. People just sort of go, oh, I'm going to pick up my diary and turn that into a published book.
So how would you define memoir then?
So, well, annoyingly, the dictionary definition is a collection of memories. But publishable, a literary memoir, which is the genre that I teach, that I read, that I love, is a story based on someone's experience. So it's a real life experience that you have turned into a compelling narrative. And you, the author of the memoir, are the narrator, and you're also the main character. And it's this ability to view your story objectively with the conventions of telling, the same conventions, like creative and structural conventions of writing a screenplay or a novel. It needs to have a compelling start. It needs to have an interesting middle. So it needs to have a midpoint that changes in some way. I'm really simplifying it here. And it needs to have an end that is satisfying to the reader. So there needs to be some kind of transformation. So really it just needs to be a compelling story based on something that has happened to you. It is not your entire life story.
If you've got any questions for Louisa, 1300 222 774, or you could text through 0437 774 774. Louisa, I've got one here. What do you do about tricky family members when you want to write a memoir? Do you have to wait until they die? That's from Anonymous.
Yeah, a lot of people ask this. So coming back to the fact that a memoir isn't every single thing that happened to you. A memoir isn't your diary entries. You can change names. Don't forget that this is your story. This is not someone else's story.
But don't people then accuse you of, fabricating your life story then? Isn't that then what happens?
Well, the thing is, memoir is based on memory, and memory is fallible. So you're not going to have a forensically. This is
a good point.
It's not an investigative piece of journalism. So you are not going to be held to account for every single, that you were wearing a red top on the Friday, the 13th of January, when in fact you were wearing a blue top, or this person said that. And there's ways that you can do this creatively in terms of making it very clear to the reader that you are not putting words in someone's mouth, you don't remember it correctly. Or Mary Carr, who has written, I can't remember how many memoirs, at least 3. I love her. She did this really well in The Liars Club, which was a family memoir. And I advise anyone who wants to write a memoir, and mention family members, to read some family memoirs and see how it's done well. And she used really interesting sort of phrases to enter into a paragraph about her sister or her mum, or like a particular event. There was an event where her dad shot at them by accident or something. So, you can imagine she was writing about some really intense family stuff. And she would at the beginning of the sentence, she would say something like, "I think my sister said something like this," or she could have said this. So
right.
it's really
making it clear.
Yeah, making it clear that she can't remember exactly. And, and educated by Tara Westover. I mean, the things that her family did to her in that memoir are just, it's extraordinary that she's alive. And she is really, she just brings it back to herself. Like, this is my memory of it. I was a child, so obviously I'm not going to know what the weather was that day or what he said. And you can change names, and you can even change locations. You just put like an author's note at the beginning. But it's coming back to that fact that a memoir is your story and your account. It's not an investigative piece of journalism, and it's not someone else's story.
We're speaking with Louisa Deasey, and we're talking about how to write a memoir in Let's Get Practical, and we invite your questions on 1300 222 774, or you can text 0437 774 774. I've got a few quickies here. Is a memoir different to an autobiography? Asks one texter. Louisa. Different?
So this is really confusing, because in the bookshops, memoir is sort of in the autobiography or biography section. Autobiography is the author's account of their life, right? So like my memoirs would be in an autobiography section, but you typically wouldn't be, no one would want to read your autobiography unless you're famous. So unless you're Prince Charles or Harry, or, so it's a literary memoir. That's the genre. And unless you're already famous, or, a politician, or, Prince Charles, it's not considered your autobiography, because it's not your entire life story. The autobiography is generally the entire life story.
Phil from McLeod, the ABC's Paul Kennedy wrote a great memoir about growing up in the Frankston area. He also said he found The Art of the Memoir by Mary Carr a very useful instructional book. So that's from Phil. And this one, can you please outline the pros and cons of a publisher versus self-publishing, taking into account the small amount paid in royalties? Marg from Shepparton asks. Louisa.
Oh, okay. So this is, it's the difference?
Yeah, publisher versus self-publishing.
Okay, so they're completely different business models. The timelines are different. If you want to get traditionally published, you'll need to write to a much higher standard. You'll need to go through the submission process. You'll need to wait a lot longer. You'll need to know how to negotiate with agents, editors and publishers. You'll probably get an advance, which is good. They will do all of the distribution for you, which is pretty much why I've never even thought about self-publishing, because not many self-published books actually get stocked in bookshops. It's very rare. They pay for the marketing and the production of the actual book. It is harder though, because you have to be at a very high standard and you need to know how to pitch properly. Self-publishing is more expensive because you are paying for the production of the book. So you're paying for paper costs if you're printing it as an actual print on demand. You're paying for editing, copy editing, proofreading, typesetting, cover image. And you also, for both, you still need to know how to write a compelling narrative, or only 5 people will buy it. So self-publishing is a lot quicker. I've known people who've got their book out there in a month, but it is a lot more expensive because, I think you're looking at about $15,000 minimum.
Wow.
To get something to a good standard that you can put on Amazon, print on demand, or something like that, or Kindle. Because you need a cover. You need all these aspects of book publishing that people don't really consider. They're just like, why can't I get published? They don't realise that publishers actually spend a lot of money on you when they sign you as an author. So
great. I think we've answered that. Marg from Shepparton. And Katie from Clune says, who was the author your guest mentioned that she's surprised she is alive, please? Who was that?
Was that me or?
Who did you mention? Which author?
Mary
Memoir?
Carroll. Oh, Tara Westover.
Yes.
Educated. It's an incredible memoir about growing up in America with her family didn't I think they were survivalists, and she wasn't allowed to go to school. It's an incredible memoir. Tara Westover is the author.
If you've read an interesting memoir, 1300 222 774, share it with us, please, or you can text 0437 774 774. Now, I'm going to ask you this question. I'm not quite sure I understand it, though. So Catherine has texted through. She says, random question. What if a person writes a memoir, bequeaths it to their family, and then a quick check on Trove reveals it's impossible for hardly any of the memoir to be true? Well, I guess it doesn't really matter, does it? Isn't that what you're saying?
I don't know if she's asking this because she's written a memoir or someone's given her a memoir that's
I feel like somebody has given her a memoir, but it's not true.
Okay, well, we'll just ignore that because it's maybe a fiction. And this is another thing that really annoys me with memoir. Like there's, memoir teaching and stuff. I'm in this really large organisation that's based in the US of memoir writers, and people are constantly talking about fictionalizing areas of their story. And like, that's actually not a memoir. There's the art of memoir, which, and I love that book by Mary Carr, which your listener mentioned. And I bought it because there weren't, when I was working on my second memoir, A Letter from Paris, there weren't any sort of specific memoir academic classes in Australia. And Mary Carr teaches at Syracuse University in the US, and I just wanted to learn from her, and that book is incredible, and I dog-eared it. And, oh God, now I've lost the thread of what I was saying. So you're not fictionalizing pieces of your personal history. You're finding ways to, you've always got to come back to, and this is coming back to that question about how do I mention family members, is you're not writing this to get back at someone. You're not writing this to give them like a trove historical account of that day in history. You're writing this to tell a compelling and relatable story, because nobody wants to read your memoir when it's just about where you were born, where you went to school, It must cover a relatable theme. And this is really tied into what your previous guest, Tanya Diola, was talking about, which is that collective trauma is in everyone, and it's something that everyone has to deal with in their life. And this is the power of memoir and art and storytelling, and her play, which, just sounds amazing, based on her mother. It's this finding this relatable theme in the human experience, in your experience, and telling a compelling story about it. And that's really good memoir to me.
Louisa, I've just got a note here from producer Ro, because there's something that I didn't understand. So Trove is the National Library of Australia fact-checking space. And so what she was saying is that obviously being bequeathed a memoir about the family history and then going to Trove, and it's not consistent with Trove, which is this treasure trove of artefacts, curiosities and stories from Australia's culture. And so what are you saying? You're saying, well, then that is not a memoir.
Well, I'm a bit like you, Lisa. I don't really understand the question, but I will just share. So my second memoir, A Letter from Paris, was about finding out about my father's life, like my late father's life. And I didn't know anything about him when I was growing up. And I relied a lot on historical research such as Trove to fill in the gaps. I found his diaries in the library, and I was going on this whole journey of exploration, but at heart it was a memoir because it was my story of not knowing who my dad was and then learning who he was. The relatable theme there of, having a black sheep in the family and not being able to ask questions. Something interesting though, and this hopefully answers the Trove person's question, is time and time again, when I went through his diaries, papers, there's like almost 2 meters high of boxes and papers, I would find that the published account differed from my father's account. So history is fallible too. And often this can this is why memoir is also really valuable, because I know historians that work on stuff about World War II, for example, or World War One, and where the historical account, which is dictated by obviously the governments and the societal norms of the time, has to go through certain really rigorous sort of political, I don't know what the term is, but when you actually find a diary or a letter from someone who lived through it, you find that actually they weren't telling the full story.
Mm. Oh, Louisa, there's a text here. Katie from Clunes has filled in some gaps. The exact thing happened with the memoir, A Million Little Pieces. The author, James Frey, originally sold as a memoir, later marketed it as semi-fictional novel because Frey admitted later that many parts of the books were, in fact, fabricated.
Yeah, that's not memoir. Yeah. A memoir is your true account, as well as you can, as honest as you can, of a particular experience that you've had.
Yeah, but understanding that it's coming from your memory and therefore it's your account of things. Oh, what about this one? Chris from Cobram, we're really getting into, is this a memoir or not? I'm writing my mother's story. I'm embellishing it. Is it fiction? What genre?
I don't. He's writing a biography of someone else. So, yeah, embellishing is fiction. If he's adding details that aren't true, that's fiction. Full stop.
And another text here just saying self-publishing can be done for less than $15,000. I wrote and self-published. Book was out within a few months, and with all the online and advertising included, it was about under $5,000 in my case, and people still order it online. I get a monthly statement of income. So there's, I guess, cheaper ways to do that as well, Louisa.
Yeah, I'm not a specialist in self-publishing. I don't know. There's definitely cheaper ways to do it, but I do see that a lot of people who spend less don't end up with a really high-quality cover, for example, or good editing. But, yeah, I'm not a specialist in that area, so I'm sure people can find cheaper ways to do it.
We're speaking with Louisa Deasey, and in Let's Get Practical, we're looking at how to write a memoir and inviting your thoughts on 1300 222 774, or you could text through 0437 774 774. So how should we get started, Louisa? What do we need?
Yeah, so I think the hardest part is choosing and making a decision on the experience or the thing that you're going to write about. Remembering that you're not just writing about everything that happened to you. And I sort of like to think that if you could, narrow it down to 3 of the most seminal experiences in your life, for example, that you want to write about, which one of those 3 gives you a bit of a scary feeling? You feel a bit scared. I would write about that one because that's probably the one that's going to challenge you the most and bring out those sort of relatable collective themes and be the most compelling and transformational for you to write. And I haven't even gone into all of the positive physical and psychological effects of writing a memoir, but, there's actually been studies with patients with trauma who were given writing exercises, and some were asked to write without any kind of framework whatsoever, just write, free write, and others were asked to write with a narrative framework, which is what I teach, which is like the hero's journey or the 3-act story structure, giving an experience a beginning, a middle, and an end, basically. And the ones that used a narrative framework to write about some of the most traumatic things that had happened to them in their lives had the most powerful positive effects, both on their physical health in terms of reduction in painkillers to long-term, health. And in some cases it was found, there's one study which talked about using this writing technique of using a narrative framework. It was as powerful, if not more, than cognitive behavioural therapy on people who had gone through an extraordinarily stressful experience. So it's really beneficial. So it's not self-indulgent to write a memoir.
And when we're writing it, do you map it out, or are you really just trying to get it out first before you do any structuring?
Yeah, so I sort of like to do a bit of both. You need to have that free kind of creative brain to figure out what you're writing first and foremost. And that is the hardest part, is to figure out, narrow it down to one topic and one focus. I sort of teach a way to narrow it down to a focused sentence so that you're always sitting down with the end goal in sight. This story is about this, and we go through this to get to this. And then you can be as structured as you want or as unstructured as you want, as long as you know what you're doing every day when you sit down at the computer. And the easiest way I've found to do that is to use these narrative frameworks, the 12 stages of the hero's journey, the 3-act story structure, these plotting techniques, because it helps you to explore the experience with this sort of objective perspective of this is a story and this is not, this is not personal, which sounds really weird. But it's actually, I think this is why those studies all show that memoir is so powerful for trauma. And, it's such a powerful psychotherapeutic tool, because you are learning to see an experience objectively and take your personality out of it. And you're seeing your life objectively. And you can only do this when you use this sort of narrative framework and you're seeing it like play out like a movie almost. It's pretty interesting, all that stuff, because I think I was reading that the definition of trauma, I'm going to get this quote wrong, but the definition of trauma is it's not having a story around an experience, meaning you don't have any context to it. It's completely unpredictable. It's come out of nowhere. And by giving context to an experience and framing it internally and writing a narrative about it, which basically means you're playing God because you are writing the story, which is really powerful internally, you are rewiring your brain to then see that as something that you are in control of and you gain perspective on. And I think this is why those studies show the beneficial
beautiful
effects of writing.
Very
memoir.
cathartic indeed. Thank you so much, Louisa.
You're welcome. I hope this helped.
Louisa Deasey, who is helping us with how to write a memoir. Asked you for your favourites. You've said Unknown, says Alex from Preston. Metanoia is a beautiful book with a fun twist, says Andy. It's now 12 o'clock. Thank you very much for our producer, Ro. It's news time on